Time now to welcome our next live guest. We've got Marilyn Serber from 10th Street back with us again. Marilyn, it looks like you're on the floor of an exhibit hall right now. Where are you at and what are you doing?
I am at TCA Safety in Nashville, Tennessee, and this is the event, safety and security event here, which is great. It's a lot of safety folks. TCA is unique in the fact that they cover and represent all of the truckload carriers. And so the safety event gives an opportunity to, safety managers, directors of safety, vice presidents of safety to come and find out what the latest things that are happening in the safety market are. And it's just really, it's one of my favorite shows of the year. And as you guys know, I go to almost every event in trucking.
And Marilyn, it's always good to have you on here and hear your perspective. Right now, let's lay the landscape real quick in terms of safety. Where are we right now in the industry, and what are we doing and where are we going?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of things that are happening around safety, specifically around safety technology. As you guys know, there's tons of technology available to carriers, and it's changing and it's getting better every day. And so they're here, some of the hot topics, of course, are some of the things that are going on with the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, some of the things that are happening, what's going on with speed limiters, how do carriers feel about that? TCA supports speed limiters, as does ATA, so that's a hot button issue. Another thing that is happening right now is the market is starting to shift and change, like we talked about, and level out. The shift, as it should, kind of turns to how do we retain drivers with safety? And so because we've been talking about, how much the market has changed and how much trucking has changed and how much the people who are doing the jobs are changing, that also applies to safety. And so you see more focus than ever to say, how do we use technology to retain drivers, engage drivers, and keep them safe and make sure they have the latest and most up-to-date information? So there's a lot of focus on that to data. We have access to more data than ever. And so how do we use those safety data points to make our industry safer, to make drivers safer, and retain them, frankly?
And so, Marilyn, there's been a lot of talk recently around a ton of legislation coming out, whether that's on hours of service changes, as you mentioned, speed limiters, talking about an increase in technology required in cabs. Can you talk a little bit about some of the feelings, maybe on the driver side, with some of these safety improvements? A lot of drivers we know don't necessarily like the idea of, I've got more things watching me, right? Even though it's going to, in the long term, make things safer. Can you talk a little bit about how they're responding to this legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question, because I think, certainly TCA, ATA, FreightWaves, we're all here and we're working and we want to make things better for drivers and make our industry better for drivers. But something that definitely gets lost in that, right, is we're making decisions based on data or things we think are going to be better, but it doesn't mean it's the most popular sentiment with drivers. So certainly speed limiters is a hot button issue. Even with smaller carriers that hire a lot of owner operators, right, there's real fear about what that will do to their ability to be able to hire an owner operator. And, in some states, depending on what the speed limits are there, some carriers think it's, actually maybe not as safe, right? The drivers are not happy about it. And there's also the question saying, well, if these small owner operators can't work for a carrier, right, because they have to have a speed limiter and these carriers are following the rules, then what does that do? Does that send carriers to some of these owner operators are just going to find a way around it? Do they do that? What does that look like? Does it move more owner operators out of companies and into a more independent market where they're working for brokers? Again, so there's a lot of skepticism. Certainly, we understand the safety issue, and I think drivers understand the safety issue, but they're really concerned about the speed limiters. I would say the same thing. I think technology is more widely adopted and accepted now, especially cameras and, a lot of the safety alert technology, because it's been around longer now. And so I think drivers are getting used to that. One of the things that I think makes an impact with drivers when it comes to that type of technology is show them somebody in in your company or somebody else's company that where it's saved them, right? Because everybody's after the big truck. In a lawsuit, in an accident, it's always their fault. And so if you can show examples of where having that technology actually saved the driver and represented the driver and the carrier in a more fair manner, I think that goes a long way with moving the needle.
So Marilyn, what about autonomous representation at the TCA Safety Conference? Because autonomy is a big part of safety, and then safety is the huge part of autonomy. Can you talk a little bit about if there's any representation from any of the numerous autonomy companies out there, and if so, kind of what their reception is?
Yeah, so there is representation. This is at this TCA Safety and Security event. This isn't as much. There's not huge representation like that, like there is maybe at the TCA, the annual event, or ATA annual, some of those bigger events. But there is definitely autonomy companies here walking around talking about that. It's part of the sessions and kind of thread through, I think, every conversation we're having about safety at this event is like, what does that look like in the future? How does that technology come into play? And so I think that it's well received. I think people here, carriers, are saying, what's the future? Yes, we are moving to autonomy in some way. We don't have a timeline there, but we are getting updates, and carriers are working with autonomy companies to figure out what that looks like and having those conversations, and they're definitely being had here as well.
And Marilyn, we spoke to a lot of the technology that's happening within the industry, different components to really make the infrastructure of driving safer and being able to make data-based decisions. Any talks around driver training and different techniques or different skill sets are going to be pushed a little bit more as we continue to move forward in the supply chain?
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of focus on driver training, because one of the things that all of this great safety technology gives us, right, is information to say, hey, we can use this information to educate drivers. And so what training does that look like? Training is getting more specific, feel like, every day. And so it's taking those alerts and all that in-cab technology that's coming from an ELD unit and cameras and engines and all of the things, and designing, training plans that meet the needs of your drivers. And, one of the things that I think we've been talking about here over the last 24 hours so far is, how do you make custom training plans? How do you train a driver for what they need to be trained on versus a one size fits all approach to training? Every driver gets this. You're hearing conversations to say, what are these drivers' specific competencies? And then how do we supplement and fill in and make this driver better? And if they don't need more help on backing, then they don't need more help on backing. That's just, a crazy example, but maybe they need a lot of help with their pre-trip. So now we have the ability through technology to know what are specific needs of different drivers and create training plans that meet the needs of those specific drivers.
I love that. The one-size-fits-all approach is not necessarily working in every situation. Marilyn, thank you for joining us today. As always, great to have you, and we're looking forward to see what comes out of you in Nashville at the TCA conference.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you soon.